From Content 360, this is the state of client acquisition. Welcome to the State of Client Acquisition podcast. This is your host, Michael Bohannes. In this podcast, we go down and deep into all aspects of organic client acquisition for coaches, consultants, and small B2B CEOs. And we have a special focus on LinkedIn. We cover the entire acquisition process from offer creation to positioning to content to outbound and selling on Zoom. And we want to make this all about you, the listener. So if you have a question, please go to stateofclientacquisition.com to submit a question. Today, we kick off with the topic of building a client persona and the number one mistake that people make in this context. And then we discuss what an agency in India can do to get clients in the US. We then review a couple of conversation starters for outbound prospecting. We then discuss how we can speed things up during prospecting, how to be more productive. And finally, we get into what is more important in a LinkedIn headline, clarity or selling a big dream. So I hope you find something valuable in today's episode, and let's get right into it. Okay, so today on the top of the show, I want to tell you about a huge mistake that I see many high-ticket consultants, coaches, and B2B CEOs make when it comes to understanding their target audience. And that is to overemphasize demographic attributes such as job title, position, company size, and so on. And in turn, underemphasize the one topic that is the one that really matters, which is the pain and problem your ideal customer is trying to solve. And the crazy thing about this is that most people would, of course, agree. They would say, yeah, of course. I mean, we should focus on the pain and the problem. But I see all the time that people are doing this wrong. And even I have done this wrong this week, and I'm preaching this stuff. So it's a really sneaky problem that just creeps up on us from all kinds of directions. And so that's what I want to discuss today. So if you have a challenge with resonating with your target audience and getting them engaged on your content, then this one is for you. Because at the end of this, I'm going to share how I recommend that you approach your target client. And I'm going to give you a pretty comprehensive list of questions to ask your existing clients that will not only help you build a far better persona, but that will also help you create much better content that will really resonate with your target audience. So let me start by telling you a story of what happened to me 2 days ago. So there was this guy, let's call him Lenny, and he approached me on LinkedIn and he wanted to give him feedback on an app that he was developing. And I don't usually respond to these type of requests, but somehow this guy got my attention. And so we started talking, and he told me that he and his friend, they were building a networking app. And before I said, let's go on a call, I wanted him to first give me a couple of bullet points. So he tells me what it's about, what kind of problem he's solving. And especially given that it's a networking app, what is the issue? What is the app solving that LinkedIn, Facebook, WhatsApp, and email in combination cannot solve for me? Because I tend to be quite skeptical about networking apps, but I said, let's give him a fair shake here. And so he told me what the supposed value was. And as he told me, I realized, yes, this is something I would definitely not use in a million years. And basically the value proposition was all about nurturing your second and third degree connections, knowing when they are in town, highlighting their birthdays to me, and so on. And I don't have any such problem. I wouldn't use it. I have a wife, I have a 7-month-old baby. I'm very, very busy with my business. And if there's something that has taken the backest of back burners, it's my second and third degree connections. And whether they are in town, I don't want to know if they are in town. But then when Lenny kept insisting that he wanted me to get me on the phone to get my feedback, he said that it would be valuable even if it were negative. And I was like, dude, why do you want my feedback? I'm not in your target market. I'm just not in your target market. Don't you get it? And I think there's two reasons why he wanted my feedback. And either I'm flattering myself by thinking that I'm now such an authority on LinkedIn on starting a business that people want to come to me for general advice, or, and that's a little bit more likely, I think that it was that I ticked his demographic markers of his target audience persona. And that was enough for him to want my opinion. And he probably had his persona say things like, he's an entrepreneur or a solopreneur, is male in his 40s, professional experience, internet savvy, worked in a large corporation, maybe very active on LinkedIn with a lot of connections in the online marketing space. Anything of those boxes that I tick. And while those markers are a good starting point, they're only that. They're only a starting point. Those demographic markers help you to narrow the field. But once that field is narrowed, you have to acknowledge that out of 100 people who fit that description, only about 10% will actually be in a position that they have that pain, that problem that they want to solve. And so that's why the only person, once you've narrowed it down, the only person you want to talk to is the person who has the pain you're trying to solve. And it's a huge mistake to forget that. It's not just irrelevant information that you would be getting. It is downright damaging to take advice from someone who isn't in your target market because they don't have the pain. And I think we've been conditioned in our business culture to construe our audience persona mainly with demographic markers. It's this stereotype. We imagine a persona built as this good-looking cartoon person on a nicely made PowerPoint slide, and her name is Jenny, and we know she has a husband, 2 small children, likes to do yoga, and is a HR director, right? And given that we are pattern-seeking animals, whenever we meet someone who ticks those markers, female, 30s, married, children, yoga, we automatically give her opinion about our product or service a huge amount of weight, even if that person thinks and says they would never use our product, that they don't have that pain. And giving them this weight is a big mistake. And it's really a crazy thing with prioritizing demographic markers over whether the person has the actual problem. We just allow people who don't want us to influence who we are. And that's like a recipe for disaster. It's like the theme of every other 80s teenager drama, where this kind of theme is where the hero is trying to make friends with the wrong people who don't want the best for him, and he's trying to be something that he's not. And so in business, I see this all the time. And a few weeks ago, there was another example of this. And that's why it just comes up in so many different guises. There was this lady who's creating some kind of employee engagement solution, and she has it already, I don't know. But she asked me questions about how I manage my employees. And I told her that I've set up my business so that I don't have to have employees, and that I hope it'll stay that way for a long time. I have a few freelancers who are doing specific tasks for me, and that's it. And here's what she then asked, and this is like mind-blowing. She said, okay, if you had employees, what would you want to do with them to keep them engaged? I was like, she's asking me about a hypothetical situation, and assuming that she wasn't just trying to be polite, but why would she? She was ready to have my hypothetical answer to influence her decision-making with the product. And I'm speculating here, but I have a hard time coming to any other conclusion. I think it is, again, because I ticked her demographic boxes. Why would she otherwise ask for my opinion? Probably, I was the small company CEO's middle-aged online savvy. I don't know what it could have been. And then finally, just to show you that I'm not just, pooping on other people, but that I'm not exempting myself from this craziness, I realized yesterday that I was caught in this delusion myself. So here's what I did. There's this guy who would be a perfect target client for me. And we've now become a little bit like LinkedIn friends. You can almost say that. And so yesterday I got into a conversation with him, and I asked him about his business growth plans. And he's just not very ambitious. He's happy with the amount of money that he's making. I would presume is somewhere in the mid 5 digits. And he enjoys his work. He doesn't have any ambitions to build a 6 or 7 figure business. And over the course of the conversation, I found myself really digging into why he didn't want to make more. I asked him questions like, why is the idea of making $500,000 a year not appealing? I mean, here are a bunch of things that you could do. And I expressly didn't do like, oh, get a mansion, get a sports car. No, it was like things like support your charity of choice, take your parents on a trip around the world, whatever, this kind of stuff. And while now it could be just seen as a chat between friends, in retrospect, I realized when I dig inside myself, I realized that a partial motivation of mine was to try to change his mind. because his demographic markers were perfect for me. He's a solopreneur with experience. He has client testimonials. He does obviously quality work, and his target audience is on LinkedIn. So check, 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 check. A lot of boxes ticked for me. But the main thing that all of us, Lenny, that employee engagement woman, and myself in this case, all of us got wrong is that we didn't ask the question if the person in front of us, the actual individual, not our avatar, but the individual, has the problem that we want to help them solve. And my LinkedIn friend is simply not financially ambitious. He doesn't want to make 10 to 20K months. I mean, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, but it's not easy and you need to work hard for it, and he doesn't want to work hard for it. But because he's a solopreneur with experience and with client testimonials in the UK, I got into this delusion of digging into his motivation and trying to understand why he was so unambitious. And I shouldn't have done that. I have better things to do with my time. He's a nice guy, but I probably spent some 15 minutes on this, and that was not necessary because there was part of me who wanted to change his mind to make him into my ideal client avatar. And that's just not how it works. You cannot change someone's mind, right? I mean, you can, but it's a really long process. But if that is your main marketing model, changing people's minds, then good luck. You need to tap into already existing needs in the marketplace. And by the way, you'll read this in every good copywriting book. You cannot make people want something. You can only tap into pre-existing needs and wants. So here's what I'll ask you to do if you're in the phase of researching or refining your audience persona. I mean, it's even useful if you're already running your business and it's all going well, just refining your client avatar. I hope you have one. I hope you have one written down, a persona that kind of talks about what are their problems, the pains, and so on. And number one, go into it and remove everything that doesn't talk about that person's pain or problem. Okay. It's just not very relevant what kind of demographic markers they have. And then elaborate on those pains and problems and really dig into them. Spend 1 to 2 pages writing about them. Base this on real conversations you've had with real people, and only with clients or people who almost became clients. People who you thought they would sign up and then they didn't. And of course, clients you've had. So no, not people who ruled you out after a quick discovery call. No. Really people who wanted to work with you. And then 90% of the effort that you invest in your target persona should be in those areas, pain or problem, not in demographic markers, not in what they like to do on weekends and how many kids they have, okay? So, by the way, I keep talking about this difference between pain and problem. I keep mentioning them both. Just a quick distinction of and why they matter. A pain is essentially when you have a stomachache and you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you what is your problem, namely that you have an ulcer. Okay, that's the distinction between pain and problem. Pain is manifesting an unpleasant feeling, and problem is the actual reason that you have the pain. So in business, the example would be the pain is the uncertainty that you don't know where money is going to come from 3 months from now. And the problem is the lack of knowledge on how to do effective outbound prospecting. Okay, and maybe the problem is also a lack of prospecting mindset, of unwillingness to sell. Okay, so that's just a quick digression. You need to understand both at both levels, pain and problem. And if you don't have that info yet, if you think that you would be speculating on what it is, I really recommend that you don't speculate, but you actually, at least first of all, try to recall specific conversations you've had with clients. And if you cannot recall that, then you need to have them. You need to actively speak to your clients and seek them out to have those conversations. So, and here's how to do it. And I'm going to give you a list now of questions that I would recommend that you ask them once you get them on the phone. So I would say pick as many clients as you can. Probably 10 would be enough if you can, but as many as you can. And also maybe prioritize those who were happy working with you, because ultimately you want those. If somebody had false expectations working with you and then they were unhappy, of course, you want to kind of discount their opinions a little bit. So here are the couple of questions that I would invite you to ask them. First of all, ask them why they signed up with you. What was the main reason? Then what competitors of yours did they consider, if any, and why they chose you in the end? And that's going to be a good hint at what your probable zone of genius is. And zone of genius, that's kind of like your superpower. That's the thing that you should very much push in your marketing, mention it in your sales calls, because this is what people come to you for. Okay, next, what pain point were they trying to solve? And also at the time, what did they think was their problem? Again, what was the pain that they had? There was a dominant reason why they signed up with you. What was the problem? What did they think was the actual underlying reason for their pain? And then has this understanding, next question, has this understanding of pain versus problem, has it changed since working with you? Next question, why did they need to solve it? That's going to help you, once you get to that, it's going to help you understand the kind of what would be the impact or cost of staying where they are. Next question, what would have been the downside of not solving it? Next question, what part of your product or solution do they or did they use or care about the most? Super important. Like once they're with you, they evolve, their mindset evolves, and they will see, oh, this is so important to me and I didn't realize that I had that missing. Those are great epiphanies that you want to know about. And then what did they think that they needed the most, but now know that it wasn't the case, that they didn't need, and vice versa. Then what were they afraid of and why did they almost not buy? That's a really nice question. It's going to tell you those unspoken objections that they had towards the end. And then next question, if they are part of a company or organization, what was the process to get all decision makers on board and who made the final decision? The whole buying process, you want to know about that. And then finally, what is the best way to get the attention of someone like them? And that's going to help you build your sales process and your marketing process. Cool. So as you then are recording their answers to these questions, and I would very strongly recommend that you actually record them on audio, of course, with their consent, make sure that you use their language. I see this mistake happening so often because many marketers then take what they hear and then they overlay this layer of business BS over it. And then you get websites like, super corporate sounding websites that don't really speak like any normal people talk, and I really invite you to, for example, look at some of the, fintech upstarts as a good comparison. For example, I love a company called Lemonade. Go to lemonade.com. They do something with insurance, and just compare the language that they use on there with a company like Intel, for example, and tell me which one of those feels more like that's their audience's language. Okay, so really write it down in how your audience phrases it. Cool. So those are the things you want to fill your avatar with, not demographic markers, but those kind of pain and problem markers. And of course, you can also ask prospects similar questions, but clients are better because, of course, they have proven that they want to work with you. And just to give you an idea of how relatively unimportant those demographic markers are, it's a nice closing anecdote. I recently signed up a client who is really not in my typical target audience because I normally work with people who do B2B. And this gentleman I now work with, he's helping people who have porn addiction, of all things. And if I had had a rigid persona, I would have ruled him out. I would have said, okay, no, he's not B2B, he's B2C. But then also because I focus on the pain and the problem, which is all in the area of getting clients and scaling a business via courses and group coaching programs, I started a conversation with him. So because I thought, well, he's likely to have clients who pay him a relatively high amount because, porn addiction is a very tricky subject to overcome. So people would be probably willing to pay 4-digit figures to solve this. And I started a conversation with him just like I would with a B2B person. And this is, by the way, this is why I'm always a little bit skeptical of people who only work with men or women, coaches who help women overcome imposter syndrome and so on. I think just people's problems are way more universal, especially something like imposter syndrome. Many people have that. I'm sure this is not a monopoly of women. And so I think if they are focusing on a demographic marker and giving it too much weight, in this case, it's sex, and they're giving the demographic marker sex too much weight above prioritizing actually solving people's problems, imposter syndrome. Okay, so summary, demographic markers like job title, seniority, age, sex, and so on, they're a decent starting point, but in comparison with really understanding their pains and problems, I would say they are akin to what a pirate's map in a bottle is to Google Maps. Okay, it's just no comparison with in terms of precision and your ability to find details and nuance and all of that about your target client. So the huge massive benefit of going in depth on people's pains and problems is that your positioning will be sharper and people will recognize themselves better in your marketing content. Cool. Okay. And with that, we can get into your questions. Gabriel, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question you asked me on LinkedIn?
Hi, hope you're doing great and everything. I just had a basic question, which is that when it comes to acquiring clients and all abroad, so out here it's like midnight. So I just want to know, like, what do you do to bridge the gap of trust? Coming from someone who does not stay in the same country as you, how do you acquire clients from a place like India and get clients from like the US or something?
Okay, so you're in India and you would like to acquire clients in the US.
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me what you do, Gabriel?
So I run a social media marketing agency for mainly for e-commerce brands and coaches and consultants and everything, mainly on e-commerce.
Okay. Okay. Social media for e-commerce brands. Okay. Have you had any clients outside of India?
Not yet, not really.
Not yet. Okay. Okay. Cool. So and have you actually, that would be interesting. Have you spoken to people and do you really understand their preconceptions about what it would be like working with somebody in India? What are their concerns?
Not exactly, not really. Like I did work with one before, like kind of. We didn't really get into a position of working together, but when he did speak, it didn't really go through. I mean, there was like a lot of I don't know how to explain, like a lot of unsaid things, and suddenly like we stopped talking just because I mean it didn't go forward from there. Things just ended, like he started ghosting on me, and then it didn't really go forward.
Yeah, of course. That's normal. That happens. Okay. So first of all, exactly in line with what I said at the opening here, I would strongly recommend that you try to really understand what people's objections are.
That does add
Yeah.
up. I did take a lot of notes of that.
Yeah. So you really want to understand what exactly are their preconceptions. And it could have simply been that in this case, the guy just for whichever reason didn't want to work with you. But of course, there is a prejudice that people have about work, people in India. That's clear.
True.
So we cannot paper over that. So
Very
the
true.
preconceptions that people have, and I can actually tell you what mine are. So we could even turn this into, I'm not an e-commerce brand, but I think could be, well, given what I said, I should probably not be telling you then what my preconceptions are. But the thing is, the one main thing, and I'm pretty sure this is universal, and I would just kind of invite you to use that as a hypothesis that this could be the issue, because I've experienced this myself. Number one is a language issue, especially when it comes to social media. I always have the feeling that it's just you guys have a very different way of saying things. And while I have more confidence that, for example, if I work with somebody in Australia, Britain, or the US, that they will be able to get the lingo by default, my expectations, because I get so many messages, from people who try to work with me. You get these regular emails, where somebody has an SEO agency, they want to do link building for you. You can always recognize that it's somebody writing from India.
That's true.
Right? So you always have that. So that's why from a linguistic standpoint, that would be my concern if I were to hire an agency in India. And then the second thing, and that is a difficult thing, it's a really intractable thing, but I've experienced this and I know this from other people who are in this space, in like they need tech support in India and so on. The issue is that the preconception is that it's difficult to throw a task over a fence, like say a complex task, and just assume that it's going to get done. What I've experienced, and people told me this, is that people who work in India, outsourced services, are great for when you have really specific tasks to do and they know what they have to do. But if it's like a complex problem, it's difficult to trust that it will happen. And I had a development project once myself in India, and I kept hearing from my contact, from my guy there, who said, yeah, it's going to get solved, it's going to get solved. And it didn't get solved. And then I was there, and it's like, and then I had to repair it. I had to pay like £5,000 locally for somebody in the UK to take over and rebuild it. Okay.
Wow.
So that was just my experience. And I'm sure this is, I don't know to what degree this can be extrapolated, but I've heard this judgment from others as well. So we could, on one hand, we could be all, uppity and say, oh, how xenophobic is this, or how racist is this? This is not, you cannot generalize this, and so on. Or we could simply take people's actual concerns and work on them. And so those are just two hypotheses: the language and the kind of the trust. Can I trust that it's going to get done, something complex? Okay, so those two things, it's just my hypotheses. I would invite you to enter those potential conversations, with potential clients, having those two things in the back of your head, that they could be the issue. And then I would really invite you to conduct conversations with your prospective clients and asking them, hey, so this is what we do. And we'd just love to know whether you would consider working with an agency from India. And I invite you to be perfectly open with me. I'm not going to take anything personal. If you believe that there's anything that it's too politically incorrect to say, please say it, because I want to know the truth. This is really important, that you get to the truth. And then you really work hard on it in overcoming these preconceptions, because there's a lot of benefit of working with people in India. Of course, the cost factor being a really important one. But the key thing is, once you prove yourself to clients in the West, that you are, better than the others, that you don't tick those stereotypes, that you don't, fill those prejudices, then you will be able to charge more, and you will be able to get those clients, because they will see, yeah, sure, I could get somebody in India for like 10, 15 bucks an hour, but those guys, what Gabriel does, that's a class above them, and I'm perfectly happy to pay them 20 an hour, because my only alternative would have been to go to somebody in the Ukraine where they don't speak good English, and I would pay them 30 an hour. So Gabriel is totally worth it. But you can only get there if you really get those objections from your target audience, why they would not consider working with you, and then try to win some of them over and give them assurances like, hey, I'm going to be personally monitoring every single thing my people do. I'm going to be checking in with you every week. You can tell me anything that has happened that you weren't happy with on social media. We will review it. And if you're not happy within 2 weeks, you're going to get your money back, or something like this, some kind of guarantee, so that you reassure them that just give me a shot.
Exactly.
And then once you've had that, also at the outset of the relationship, I would strongly recommend you that you ask them, hey, by the way, if this works out, if you're happy with us, please, can we, agree that you will do a video testimonial with me? That we'll jump on the phone, just 20 minutes, because I need this kind of social proof from people in the West who will say, yes, Gabriel is awesome, absolutely does not take the stereotype of what normally you associate working with people in India, and he's awesome, right? And you want that kind of interview. So, John, you told me, by the way, Gabriel, do look at my testimonials page on my website, my interview with Dana Hura. You want to have a conversation like that. You want to get somebody on the phone and talk to them for 20 minutes, where you ask them, what was the situation before? How was it working with me? And where are you now?
Got it. I'd seen your previous podcast as well, going over the whole testimonials and everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much consumed all your content online.
Cool. Awesome. Cool. Does it help?
Yes, definitely.
Awesome. Good stuff. So let's look into the other questions that were submitted beforehand. So Steve, by the way, Gabriel, if you feel like dropping out, no problem at all. I know it's late in India. So let's look at Steve's question. Steve is doing outbound prospecting on LinkedIn. Very good. Good on you, Steve. And he's shared with me 3 of his first messages, and he's asked me for feedback. Now I'm going to read out one of them, and I will discuss what the problem is with the other 2. So Here's one of Steve's first messages to his prospective client. It's the opener to the conversation after they accepted his invitation to connect. So here goes. Hi, name. Great to be connected. Welcome to my network. I liked your recent post about the difference between being a boss and a leader. So true. Is that part of your coaching? So, Steve, that's not a bad opener. Actually, I always recommend that you start with, something nice, great to be connected, and then you give them a specific compliment, something that could not have come from a bot. And you did that well. So you mentioned a recent post. The main issue I have with this opener is that it's a yes or no question. So he could easily, because you asked, is that part of your coaching? So that could have been easy. He could just respond yes or no. And the other openers that you submitted, I'm not going to read all of them, but some of them, they didn't have a question at all. I mean, in fact, both of those others you submitted, you just said something nice about their, once about their background image and about their about section. So you just complimented them about something, but there was no, what's next, so what? And you need to make the effort in the beginning. You need to run that conversation. So you need to expect that they will be like, oh God, what does this guy want? You just need to barrel through it and have a good conversation. Just like you imagine you are at a cocktail party and the host tells you, please, there's 2 people over there. Could you entertain them? Just go there and you need to run the conversation. Okay. So that's your task. So I think it's worthwhile to cover a framework for good conversations that will bring you leads, because I very often hear from people, oh God, I just don't know what to say. So here's a framework for running really good outbound prospecting conversations. So step number 1 is always build rapport. And one of the best ways to do that is to give them a specific compliment. And the emphasis is on specific, because the worst thing you can do is, the worst thing you can do is just to pitch slap them right away. But the second worst thing that you can do is by giving them a generic compliment, something like, oh, it's great to be connected with leaders like yourself, which is Jesus. That's just horrible. And everybody sees through it. So strongly recommend you don't do that. Have a specific compliment, something about their background image or their photo. I remember I once complimented somebody on the sunglasses that he was wearing in his profile picture, just something that easily, you can easily think of, and that is not, could not have come from a bot. And so you, Steve, you did that well in your first question. I just would have phrased it differently than to avoid him being able to say yes or no to it. So instead of saying, is that part of your coaching? I would have said, how do you integrate this principle in your coaching? And with this, if he wants to engage with you, he has to give you some kind of substantial answer. Also, you might want to share the reason why this story about boss versus leader resonated with you. That's actually a really good differentiator between somebody who does, so there's you can do this kind of outreach in 3 ways. One is fully automated. The next one is kind of, how would I say, it's semi-automated, and it comes from somebody who's an outsourced service provider. So what happens here is that people put their target audience's LinkedIn URLs into a spreadsheet, and then they have somebody in a low wage country to just go through those URLs and to think up good first phrases to come up with. So somebody could easily have come up with something like, hey, I liked your post about being a boss and being a boss versus leader. So he could have, somebody in a low-income country could have come up with that. But what they could not have come up with is like a personal anecdote. Something like, I remember how I was once working for a boss and a leader, and your post really reminded me of that, because that boss was exactly like that person in that video or whatever, but you could just add some flavor to it so that it is a real kind of story. It's a real relationship that you are building here. Okay, so that is a very good way to differentiate yourself from those people who use VAs to populate these kinds of first messages. Cool. So that was step 1, this build rapport. And then step 2 is all about exploration. Once you get past the rapport stage, once you get a little bit of back and forth, you go into exploration mode, where you are simply going into understanding whether they have the problem that you can possibly help them with. That is the, of course, most difficult stage, because people are suddenly moving from rapport into, okay, so he's now exploring whether he can sell me something. So that's the longest phase as well. So exploration. And then step 3 is about closing. Once you recognize that someone is a potential client for you, that they actually have admitted a problem that you can help them with, you offer them a call. And those are the 3 steps in outbound prospecting. So, Steve, well done. Keep going. Make sure you ask a good question that you can develop a rapport building conversation over, and then transition into exploration and closing. You haven't showed me that, but your first opener was pretty good. Not bad at all. Cool. Next question. D asks, my outbound prospecting is really slow. I started tracking my numbers, and in 1 week where I spent 20 hours on prospecting, I started 42 conversations. I agonize over how to start a conversation, and then logging it in my spreadsheet also takes a lot of time. Great. Okay. First of all, D, kudos for logging your prospecting in a spreadsheet. That's very good. And yeah, I mean, outbound prospecting is a grind. It can be a grind, but it's a great way to get initial traction with your coaching and consulting business. And in fact, I believe that unless you are incredibly savvy in the content area, it's the only way to get, or you have a massive network, but it's the only way to get traction. That's why I always am a little bit apprehensive of other LinkedIn coaches who are always pushing the content angle. Yeah, content is great, but you'd need to be exceptionally talented if you were to get enough clients to keep you going purely from your content. I think this is becoming less and less possible. So the fact that you are doing outbound prospecting, and especially that you are logging it, that is great, D. So in terms of metrics that you should try to hit, D, what you should be aiming for is about 6 conversations per hour on average. And that is, of course, conversation starters, as well as running them, as well as then talking to the people who respond. So I think about it in this way. So it takes about 5 minutes on average to start a conversation. So that's 12 per hour. And maybe half of them are going to respond. And with some of those, the conversation will get really engaged. So I would count another hour for those conversations with those 12 people in total. And that gets us to an average of 6 conversations per hour, which means we need about 17 hours per week to do 100 conversations. And somewhere around that 100, it's going to be up or down. You know, sometimes as you're beginning, you're not very experienced yet. It's maybe going to be 200, but about 100 conversations will be the sweet spot where you get a client. Okay. So D, you said that you spend 20 hours for 42 conversations. The goal is 17 hours for 100 conversations. So you need to approximately triple your productivity. Okay. It sounds quite a lot, but it's definitely doable. You mentioned that you spend your time on, number 1, agonizing how to start, and then logging that conversation. Those are great topics, because how to start, I know it's sometimes can be difficult to come up with something personal. So I would recommend that you use the following. Apply the rule of 2 minutes. You get 2 minutes, and I would really recommend you actually have a stopwatch on your table as you're doing this, so you can always take a glance at it. You have 2 minutes to come up with something that is personalized to them based on their profile. Okay, so you have 2 minutes to find something in their work history, in their about section, photo, background image, and recent content. You just go through that and see if anything catches your attention. And if in those 2 minutes you have not found something, you have to go to your template with generic messages. And the generic message is something that is a friendly, positive template, something where you just say, great to be connected. Then you pay them a little compliment. And I was wondering, blah, blah, blah. And then you just have a question for them. It's always going to be the generic question. And have it for different scenarios. So just to give you a small example, I'm approaching solopreneurs, coaches, consultants, and some of them have their consultancy still as a side gig to their corporate job, and some are doing this full time. So I have different questions. I always start in the same way, but then I have a different question for each of them. So I have 2 template messages. I have way more, but just for the sake of the argument. So then I would invite you to also build such a repository of template messages. And if in those 2 minutes that you have not been able to start the conversation naturally, just use one of those templates and just, change, put in their first name, give them a little compliment, something relatively generic. Oh, I love the start of your about section. It's very intriguing and it immediately caught me, or something like this, something small that you don't then have to start a question about. So you skip a little bit, you skip the rapport building, with the template messages. You go a little bit directly into the problem. Okay, so that is how you can, and you really need to apply this rule and be really rigid. And it means that yes, you will not get the optimal response rate, because yes, if you probably spent 2 hours researching that person, you would get a better first message, but we simply don't have the time, because prospecting is also a numbers game. So you need to churn out those couple of first messages in an hour. Let's aim for 12. 10 is good already, but let's aim for 12. And that's your goal. Okay, so this is how you can overcome the agonizing over the first message. And second, you mentioned that it takes you a lot of time to log the details. So probably I would say that you mentioned the name. Maybe what do you mention? I mean, what do I track? So I track name, where they are, when I started the approach, how long it took me, and what kind of message did I use, whether it was template or custom. So that's what I log. That is pretty quick. You can just copy it over from any previous line that you had before. So that needs to be done really quickly. And if this takes you a lot of time, again, I would invite you to see how and to explore how you can make things faster. And this kind of reminds me of a topic that I recently heard from Cal Newport, who's one of my favorite authors. I believe he calls it cognitive workflow engineering. I mean, it's a mouthful, but it's pretty straightforward. The idea is that while in industrial production, we have perfected every single turn of the screw. We know how many seconds it takes from this piece to go to that piece. Imagine like a modern car factory. It's all done by robots now, but especially when we transitioned from the workshop way of building a car to what Henry Ford did, that was the huge revolution. And the Japanese then perfected it, where you just know exactly down to the millisecond how long it takes for a person to take this thing and to plug it in, whatever. I'm not very, I don't know much about car manufacturing, but you know exactly what I mean. And that, while it has completely taken over industrial production, it has absolutely not taken over cognitive work. Like we are in, we work online and we do cognitive work. We are at this absolute workshop level of working. It's crazy when you think about, you are trying to write an email, a document, and a billion things ping at you, and you believe, oh yeah, what was that again with the Baltimore Ravens? When did they win the last Super Bowl? And you just go into it, you just allow yourself to get sidetracked. It is like if somebody who's working on an assembly line suddenly decided that they wanted to, take a nap. It's mental, it's crazy. So I would strongly recommend you that you apply some cognitive workflow engineering and you record every single thing that you're doing and learn how to be faster. I see people doing things like one of my clients did this the other day. She actually, in order to scroll on a page, she went with the mouse to the scroll bar and pulled down the scroll bar. You need to know that the mouse has a scroll wheel and you just move the scroll wheel. And there's a million other things, like you don't need to click the little X on the browser tab. You can actually use Control T to open a new browser tab, because any keyboard shortcuts makes things faster. So that is cognitive workflow engineering. Every single task that you're doing, every single micro task, every move of the mouse, you need to question it, whether it's really necessary. And that's how you will get to 3x your productivity, D. Okay, so this is a superpower. And I believe that with this, if you really did this optimally, you could, 10x your productivity. And this is how we got from a car costing, I don't know, it was only a product for the upper 10,000 when it started. And then Henry Ford democratized it, because he brought down the cost by, I don't know by which factor, but it was crazy. So this is how, by this type of cognitive workflow engineering, you manage to massively reduce the time that you use. Cool. All right. Oh yeah, and one last thing on this topic of cognitive workflow engineering, I sometimes feel that people are very precious about how they do it, and about how they do their work. It's just kind of from anecdotal evidence where I've worked with people and I told them, hey, why don't you just open the tab using Control T instead of clicking that little plus sign? And they tend to be a little bit uppity about it. It's like, oh, no, this is how I do it. And I'm saying, okay, but it takes longer. And so I see this again would not be absolutely excusable in any other work environment. Just imagine if you tried to be like on an assembly line with cars and you would say, yeah, no, I just don't like using this machine. I'd rather screw the screw in manually. It's just, who cares what you want? It's slow, it's inefficient, stop doing it. So I just see that people are just very precious about, like, they associate with their identity. No, I do it this way. No, stop doing it this way. It's not good. So I think I made my point here. Cool. Okay. And so those are the questions. One last topic I'd like to cover today is an insight that I had about LinkedIn headlines. And the question is, should we aim to be inspiring or descriptive in our LinkedIn headline? And the background to this is that over the weekend, I felt like changing my LinkedIn headline. For almost a year, I teach you how to find leads on LinkedIn, talk to them naturally, get them on the phone, and sell them your service. And I felt that it was a little bit stale. I kind of felt like I wanted a new haircut. So I started working on a new headline. And then I experimented with different wordings, and one of which was, I changed the lives of coaches, consultants, and small B2B CEOs by helping them find clients on LinkedIn. And because it felt like I sell a more inspiring goal, changing people's lives. And I mean, if you're a coach and consultant who's, scraping by to get the occasional referral, and then I plug you into my organic client acquisition system, that is life-changing. And so I really wanted to get that across in my messaging. But luckily at the time, I was just messaging with a prospective client who was very chatty and open. So I just sent it to him and I said, hey, what do you think about that? And he told me, wait, I don't get what you do. And that was, again, I was talking to a prospective client, so it was not perfect. It was not a real client, but still he was in my target audience. And I just realized that with the constraints of the 220 characters that you have to make on LinkedIn headlines, I really have to make a choice. Either I will be inspirational and vague, or I will be clear but boring. So which of these to choose? Ideally you could combine them. I just couldn't make it work. When I looked, however, at some of the most successful LinkedIn influencers, my choice was clear. None of those, big names that I looked at on LinkedIn had an inspiring headline. They were much more humdrum and prosaic. Like Shay Rowbottom, she's a big LinkedIn personality. Her headline is LinkedIn video coach, I believe. Just very, very clear and straightforward. And so I've opted for clarity. I moved away from branding myself as a LinkedIn coach a little bit. And now my headline is, I help consultants, coaches, and small B2B CEOs scale organically without ads, spam, or needing a large audience. Because the worst thing for me would be if a prospective client of mine didn't understand what I do and walked away because of that. And I'm thinking, is there a similar risk of someone saying no to connecting with me, and then a competitor who promises the world to them in the headline, it's super inspirational, aspirational, and to them they say yes? Okay, possible. I just don't think it's very likely. I think it's much more dangerous that I get someone who thinks, what, changed lives by, just go. No, I want to make it super clear. I help them scale without ads, spam, or needing a large audience. Okay? Even if that maybe sounds a little bit boring. So my conclusion from this exercise is that clarity and brevity in your LinkedIn headline is more important than differentiation and uniqueness. Definitely confusion is the worst thing that could happen to you when you are trying to, all you want is that people accept your invitation. This is why you have a good LinkedIn headline, right? Because you send them an invitation and you hope that they accept. And confusion is the worst thing about this. Some people will not accept you, but those who see clearly what you do, I help you scale organically without ads, they will accept you. But if you say I change people's lives, like how do you change people's lives? Do you paint my house or what? Like, I don't know. So those were the closing thoughts on the topic of LinkedIn headline. And if nobody else has a question, then I thank you very much for coming in, and I look forward to speaking to you next week. The State of Client Acquisition is a Content 360 production. Music by Gavin Knox-Graham. To sign up for alerts and to submit written and audio questions, go to stateofclientacquisition.com. Unless I announce it otherwise, the live podcast is recorded on Wednesdays each week at 7 p.m. Central European Time. That's 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern, and 10 a.m. Pacific. And you can always join by going to www.talktomichael.com. That's Michael without an E. But if you sign up at the podcast page, you'll get the link in an email each week. I'll talk to you in the next episode.
Infinite numbers, rapid fire across the country.